All right, very good. Jeff, let's start with you. Do you have any questions at this point?
Not right now. Brad Randall, he's in the class also. We went into did our aesthetic worship service this morning. There's a church here that does mass on Friday mornings. So we just got back from doing that. He's probably not back to the office yet. So
Very cool. Very cool. So glad to hear you've done that. How did that go? Did you?
it went real well. It was very interesting. The priest there actually took time after the mass to walk us through some things and just kind of talk through some things. So it was good.
All right, and let me make one clarification. I'm not doing this to correct you. I'm saying this for the whole class since we're recording it. A lot of times students will go to a Catholic service as their aesthetic, which is a great idea. But make sure that you realize that when you go during the week, technically those are the offices. And then if you go like to Saturday night or Sunday, you're going to a mass.
Okay.
So sometimes students, they feel like, well, there's something missing, that, there weren't many people here, they weren't very welcoming. But in reality, even though it's probably not as welcoming as a typical evangelical church would be, a Sunday morning experience would be much different.
Okay.
So, if you go on a Friday morning, think about that. They're doing this on a Friday morning.
Yeah.
This is a daily time of prayer and worship. And it would, not that it's going to take off in your grade, but it would be a little more astute to say that you attended an office. And
Okay.
if you did some research on their website, you probably could figure out what office it was. St. Benedict established the offices that the Catholic Church still uses today. So this was a period of time when it was in Augustine, was part of this thought process too, that the way to pursue holiness was to get away from the cities, to move out to the desert and to form a monastic society. We would say as evangelicals that, our personal devotion with the Lord should be a seamless interaction with God, pursuing holiness. Not that we always achieve that, but that would be the goal. And then, of course, we would say we're not to be taken, we're in the world, but not of the world. In fact, I would love to ask Augustine and St. Benedict about what is that supposed to mean, in the world, but not of the world. And then the other irony is so many people followed them that cities built up around these monastic societies. So it ended up taking on a whole world of its own. So it's interesting to see how all that played out. But a lot of, if you were to do a study, the devotional classics, for example, which is more spiritual formation class. And by the way, I think I said this in the first session, but let me say it again. It doesn't hurt at this point. I think sometimes students struggle with, is this a class on what does it mean to worship and what does that look like? On a personal level, that's actually more spiritual formation.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe even systematic theology / spiritual formation. This class is a practitioner's class. This class is how do you lead others into corporate worship, which of course presupposes that you have a personal understanding of what worship is. So it all relates. And some people would even argue that, we should do more connective tissue classes anyway, instead of saying, okay, you're going to learn about this here and learn about this here. So we want you to connect the dots, but also to keep in mind, all of this is about equipping you to lead in worship. But my point about that was this. If you were to say, well, I want to do a study of the devotional classics, I think you would probably find, I don't know this for sure, I'm not an expert in this, but you would probably find that some of the best devotional classics were very much influenced by people who, in other words, the writer of the devotional classic, that person was influenced by some of these ancient church, early church, monastic practitioners. And among them, St. Benedict was very influential because he ended up organizing the day into these prayers, and they became worship services. And the bigger the Catholic Church, Jeff, I mean, you could actually, of course, if you're in London, say, and you're talking about Church of England there, you can walk into a St. Paul's on a Friday afternoon, and it's a pretty formalized service. Or into King's College Choir, where this incredible boys choir sings, most days in evensong. So depending on the size of the church, the size of the diocese, you can have a pretty elaborate daily service. But technically, that is distinguished from a mass. Okay. And I hope, as folks are hearing me say this, that you're not thinking, my goodness, how much am I supposed to know just to write an observation? We understand this is an ongoing process. Hopefully, you know more about history of worship, you know more about the connection point by the end of the semester than you do at the beginning. So that's why I'm taking time right now just to kind of back that. So very good. Other than that, though, Jeff, you don't have any questions?
No.
All right. Very good. Anybody else have a question about the class, practical questions? I see Mr. Price or Mrs. Price has joined us, even though I think their mic is muted. Anybody else?
I had a question about the worship assessment criteria that's due on Monday.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Well, I was looking to turn it in, and it talks about questions. I was just confused, I guess, about the format. Since it's 2 to 3 pages, is that questions or is it? I mean, I know it's supposed to help us for when we observe.
Yes, that's it. That's it. And that's mainly what you need to think about. What are the questions that you – so let's use Jeff as an example. He just went this morning. So I'm not asking for confession, Jeff, but I'm going to assume Jeff had his worship assessment. He had his worship assessment criteria in hand. And the better his worship assessment criteria is organized, the more clear it is, the more – well, clear is probably the best word, poignant the questions are. And he might even, depending on the service, you don't want to distract. He might even sit there and write responses during the service. Your observation is pretty much written if you have a really good assessment tool. So I'm repeating something I've said in some other video conference meetings and maybe even elsewhere. I'm not sure I can think of a single instance where that particular project has been turned in on time and folks have made anything other than an A. So in terms of the grade, if you just turn it in on time and it meets the criteria, you're going to make an A. But in terms of helping you with the observation, that's where coming up with the right kind of questions will really help you. And so, yes, it is questions. It can be just, and you might organize them in certain ways. Now, I'm repeating something that was mentioned last week, but I realize people watch different video conferences. All of your graduate study is about collecting taxonomies to some degree. You read a book, that's one person's taxonomy. Then the person lectures and gives you a different taxonomy. I took systematic theology with Dr. Stewart. He purposely gave us Grudem because he had studied with Erickson. So his lectures were more of a Stewart/Erickson taxonomy, whereas the book was a Grudem taxonomy. And we do something similar in this class. When you read the Argel Smith, Michael Sharp book on worship, that's their taxonomy. Mm-hmm. And how do they divide it? Aesthetic, kinesthetic, blended. When you look at Weber's writings, he doesn't use that taxonomy. In fact, I dare say that what he describes as aesthetic in the Spectrums book is a little different from what Argel Smith and Michael Sharp describe as, I think I said aesthetic. I meant to say blended. What Robert Weber describes as blended is different probably than what Argel Smith and Michael Sharp describe as blended. For Weber, Blended means you take new music and put it in a liturgical order. And for most of us as evangelicals and Baptists, like, what is he talking about? That's not what I think of as blended. I think of blended as you put this kind of style and this kind of style and put it in the blender and press blend, and out comes something that's hopefully seamless. And that's really you can see why Weber wouldn't like that. And I'm not saying Argel Smith and Mike say that. I'm sure they would say it in a much more sophisticated way. But I think for most evangelicals, that's how we think of blended. And increasingly, that word blended is, nobody likes that word anymore. Now we're saying multi-generational. So in some ways, even that word is outdated now, which means somebody else writes a book and creates a new taxonomy. So you're collecting taxonomies. I've shared some taxonomies, evaluative questions. In fact, if you were able to watch last week's recording, and you've been able to see some of the presentations, I've shared a taxonomy on biblical worship leadership models that comes from Weber and John Duncan, who was with us in New Orleans this week, by the way. Abraham model of leadership, which is more patriarchal family. Moses model, which is more code, ceremonial, where law enters in the worship process in terms of how you do it. David, which is a more participatory model. Solomon, aesthetic. Now, there's that word used in a different way. And it'd be hard to argue with Weber on that. I mean, what more original source do we have for aesthetic worship than Solomon building the temple? That goes back about as far as you can go, and it's biblical. And then you got the synagogue model. So in one of the PowerPoint presentations that's available on Blackboard, I use what I just described as the taxonomic structure, those biblical leadership models that come from Weber. Then I talk about how historical models match those. All of that is to say you could use any or all of that or some combination for your categories of questions. I could literally use that Weber model for my entire worship assessment tool. I could say to what degree, or my first topic might be Abraham model. And then I might have 4 questions that relate to how well the leadership, the worship leadership reflected a family model of leadership. And if I went into a mega church and I didn't feel very much like I was in a family, then I would say they didn't rate too well on that. And then I might move down to ceremonial. And maybe it was a church out in the middle of somewhere, and they did Lord's Supper, and it was just horrible. A deacon dropped they got confused which way they were walking. And what might be my observation on that? Well, it's good that we're free form as Baptists and we're kind of laid back and we don't get into all this fancy stuff. But at the same time, when we're doing Lord's Supper, there needs to be a sense of dignity. And we probably could learn something from the Catholics on that. So in other words, I could build my entire mechanism on these leadership models that Weber gives us, which are tremendous. Do you have to do that? No, I'm just sharing that as an example to say we want to empower you, to encourage you to create this however you'd like to, based on the taxonomic structures that you're learning about. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. No problem. Anybody else? By the way, were any of you able, I actually may be the first professor to record in Blue Jean. This is brand new. We've been using WebEx. And I noticed from some feedback I know the first time I sent out the Blue Jean link that you were not able to access it. Then I sent another one. I'm just trying to do a survey here. Are any of you folks present today? Were any of you able to watch the recording so I can just know if it even worked? Or do I need to go back and do some investigation on what happened?
Didn't watch it.
You did?
I didn't, no.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was anybody that actually did. That's fine. Oh, wait, I see a thumbs up. Who's that? Oh, that's my friend. That's my friend from New Orleans. So you did watch it and it worked? Okay. Could you turn your mic on so you can tell everybody how you did that? Your mic is not on.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay,
And
there it is.
you're talking specifically about the Blue Jean video.
Yes, sir. I saw it.
Okay. Tell them how you accessed it.
I actually went on my let's see. I can probably access it here. Am I allowed to share my screen?
You know what? You might be. See if you can do that. There might be a share screen button. That'd be awesome.
Okay.
I don't know if you can or not, actually.
Let's see. Did it share? Yes, sir. No, I don't think it's one.
Okay, that's all right. Just give us a brief explanation of, did you have to log in?
Well, no, all I had to do was go to the link for your class, and what I would do is I would go ahead and click on worship leadership, and then I look
So
down
you're
at
doing
your.
that- Sorry, time out. You're doing that within Blue Jeans?
Yeah, I'm doing that to get there first.
Okay, you're in Blackboard at that point.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And
Okay.
then I actually went to the announcements, and then what
Okay.
I did was that I went ahead and copied it, and then I pasted it, and it actually took me directly to the video. So,
Okay. It just took you directly to the video.
Yes, sir.
Wow,
and
that
you get to see it going.
man, it's just so awesome when we got one person, does it and it works, and somebody else does it and it doesn't work. Thank you, though. You're the first person that's been able to acknowledge that it does work. So I can at least send out an email today. And if I understood you correctly, and you're talking about the second announcement I sent, because I know the first one didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
On that second announcement, you took the link and you pasted it into a web browser, and it took you directly to the video.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that's good news. I will say this to those of you. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if it's because I was already signed into Blue Jeans or not.
See, I think that, yes. Okay, thank you for sharing that key point. I think that's the key. I think you probably have to already be signed in, and then when you press the link, it's going to automatically take you. I think that's the missing out. We just figured it out, I hope. So that's probably it. Awesome.
Okay.
Great. Very helpful. Anybody else have a question, folks? And by the way, while I'm on this topic, that last week's and the week before, I did go into some detail, like in the last 20 minutes, of how to build designs and what to think. In fact, I walked through the PowerPoint last week. I've got a PowerPoint where I talk about the questions we should ask about worship. First and foremost, was Christ exalted? And I walked through that in pretty good detail. So you might find that helpful. I mean, I think you could probably write great observations and designs without ever watching that. But, I think it might be helpful to you just from a leadership standpoint. So I would encourage you, like last week's, to at least watch the last 20 minutes. Okay, anybody else? Practical questions.
Gregory, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I am just checking to make sure. I've turned in my assessment tool that I'm going to be using, okay? And I've been
Okay,
observing worship services, and so I'm
Good.
just making sure our anesthetic worship observation is due March 9th, okay?
Okay,
And then our
hold on.
kinesthetic observation is due. I'm just making
Wait.
sure what the syllabus says about it.
All right, let's pull up the syllabus together. And you are right to go to the syllabus. That is always going to be our default on confirming dates of all types. But let me pull it up just to make sure, because I do not have those dates memorized. I just want to make sure I'm looking at what you're looking at. Okay. Let me share the screen. You guys let me know and you can see. All right. Okay, you should, no, that's not it. Uh-oh. Somehow I lost my Blackboard connection. Oh, here we go. All right. Do you see the screen here?
Yes.
All right, let's see. So all these dates written underneath are correct. So book reviews already passed. March 2nd is the worship assessment criteria. Observations. The first one is due March 9th, and we've changed. We used to make them all due at once. Our goal, folks, is to get you some feedback before the next one's due. We're going to shoot towards that. That's our goal. And that's why we split that one up. And it's the same thing on the designs. There's one design and one observation due on March 9th. So are these the dates you're talking about, Jennifer?
Yeah, just making sure, because I was just trying to plan ahead and get those kind of blended out and ready to go. So yeah,
all of these.
Hopefully that helps me out a little bit.
Yeah, and you should not see anything contradictory in Blackboard. We've tried to delete all old references. And we do sometimes, I hate to rehash something we've already discussed, but we are aware sometimes we end up with things that's old wording. Particularly last week, I expressed personal frustration with course guidelines, policies, and resources. Some things showed up there that I've taught this online now 3 or 4 semesters. I've never seen them be an issue. And all of a sudden, there were just these guidelines that were probably put in when the course was originally created that are no longer applicable, at least when I teach it. So hopefully you're not seeing anything contradictory. But yes, indeed, the dates in the syllabi are correct. All right, thanks, Jennifer. Anybody else have a question? All right. If there are no further questions, let's go.